ROI for PR, there's still the traditional ACE value, so the advertising cost equivalent. Had you paid to go into timeout, if you get a full page or half page, how much would that have cost you?
Right.
Your advertising value, and then your PR value is always perceived higher. So we times that, well, in the region we times it by 3 or 4. Personally, as an agency, we times it by 3.5 just to be in the middle, which gives clients a good idea of, had they paid for the advertising space, what it would have cost them, and then also how it's perceived based on the PR element. However, I always encourage clients, because of the way the comms industry is now, we can't work in silo with PR, in silo with social media, in silo with a marketing campaign, collateral, and so forth. So if I use a restaurant as an example, another way to measure, although it's quite time sensitive, is every single person that comes through your door, how did you hear about us today?
Sure.
In order to start to understand whether your kind of Google ads are working, whether you being within the magazines, whether your chef interview has had an impact, whether the influencers that you've given free meals to for weeks and weeks have played on that part.
Right.
We also encourage that as well, and also looking at the analytics of digital and website views and so forth.
Welcome, Rosa. We started talking about a podcast with you a couple of years back. I think I lost my steam at that point of time, work overwhelming, and but here we are 2 years later. And at that point of time also, I did not do a PR part of my podcast. And but this time again, when I thought of PR, I thought of reaching out to you.
Thank you.
So welcome to Marketing and Coffee Podcast, Lijo. Great to have you here.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So if I quickly go through, like anybody goes through, listens, okay, Rosa, I go back to the LinkedIn, predominantly PR as a career, right? So what got you into PR?
I think actually back in the day, it was the event side of things and promotions and wanting to market. I was always a good communicator. I was always the person that they put at the front of the event stands when I worked kind of as a teenager.
Right.
So naturally fell into it, and then via my study being marketing, then specialising in PR and magazines and so forth, it's kind of gone from there, I guess.
Oh, very rarely do you go on to do what you studied. I go back to my days where what I studied and what I'm doing today is completely different. But congratulations on that. But you're running your own agency right now, Associate, right? So how did it get started? What's the kind of clients that you handle? Tell me more about Associate so that listeners get a kind of flavor of what we're going to
talk about. Sure, not a problem at all. So I've been in the Middle East now for 10 years.
Right.
I came out here and worked for an agency very quickly, kind of quite a small agency really, but whilst working for that agency, I understood, or started to understand, I should say, the landscape as it sat here. Now, 10 years ago, there were a lot of the big agencies, the big boys, as I call them. And the way Dubai was shifting towards having smaller business setups, and obviously the way we can form a company here now has drastically changed as well. It meant that there was more of a need for a smaller solution sometimes, and also a more tailored solution. That, coupled with the way the industry has moved as well, it was a good time to look into actually what other options were there out there. So I started to do a little bit of freelance work, started to work for friends of friends, and then it got to the point where I was like, actually, there's a need for this here, which was nice. Now we have a fair few more boutique agencies, but the collaboration is great. So I started off the agency 8.5 years ago now, predominantly on PR. That has the kind of scope has broadened, but still the bread and butter of our business is PR, and the core of it certainly is. Client-wise, non-industry specific because of how the media landscape sits here.
Right.
That again has changed since COVID, but it was going that way anyway. We're moving further away from print. However, I don't think it will die. People always ask me that question. And then what we look at now is, because the media landscape is small, being a non-industry specific agency, we're naturally talking to the media on a daily basis for multiple clients. So it actually strengthens our relations, and it enables us to work across industries. However, I love hospitality, I love retail. Having studied fashion management, retail is still very close to my heart. Clients include Ace Hardware, Sofitel Dubai Downtown, Maidan Hotel, Gates Hospitality Group. Equally, we have some startups and smaller clients that are still very close to my heart, I would say.
Awesome. That's quite a range. That brings me to the interesting point, like, because now there's startups, there are big corporates, and before even we get into a deeper discussion on the topic that we reached, that like how has digital changed the landscape. That's a long conversation. But the big question that I get from everybody, and I know the answer, but it's to you, how do you measure ROI from a PR campaign, right? Why should I do PR? Is it is it worth it?
It's always worth it.
Yeah.
You knew I was going to say that, didn't you? With an ROI for PR, there's still the traditional ACE value, so the advertising cost equivalent. Had you paid to go into timeout, if you get a full page or half page, how much would that have cost you?
Right.
Your advertising value, and then your PR value is always perceived higher. So we times that, well, in the region we times it by 3 or 4. Personally, as an agency, we times it by 3.5 just to be in the middle, which gives clients a good idea of, had they paid for the advertising space, what it would have cost them, and then also how it's perceived based on the PR element. However, I always encourage clients, because of the way the comms industry is now, we can't work in silo with PR, in silo with social media, in silo with a marketing campaign, collateral, and so forth. So if I use a restaurant as an example, another way to measure, although it's quite time sensitive, is every single person that comes through your door, how did you hear about us today?
Sure.
In order to start to understand whether your kind of Google ads are working, whether you being within the magazines, whether your chef interview has had an impact, whether the influencers that you've given free meals to for weeks and weeks have played on that part.
Right.
We also encourage that as well, and also looking at the analytics of digital and website views and so forth.
So I think it's got much more easier with so much analytics out there on getting the touch points earlier. So now, with, as we briefly said, it may not die, but print media is gone, and so the advertising space is kind of gone. And I always been earned media is maybe 10x of what your ads do. So coming to the big question that I'm sure you must have answered multiple times, but it's good for people to hear: how has digital changed the PR industry?
Dramatically. Well, with the introduction of digital, of course, we will see the likes of, for the region, Gulf News, and then obviously Gulf News is online equivalent. What it's meant is that we're consuming media a lot quicker. We're not needing to wait for the newspaper, and we'll use the most traditional form rather of a newspaper, to be delivered in the morning. The news is more real time.
Right.
Whether that be through their websites or through social media. I mean, we all know as well, to use another one in the region, when something happens in Dubai, it's on Love in Dubai before your friends told you about it. So it's drastically changed the industry. Equally, though, it's still how we use that content and how we repurpose the PR coverage that we get. Because even with the digital sphere, and I always call it kind of a web in the background, websites, and then pages, whilst they stay there, they can get lost if they're not constantly updated. We know how that kind of works. So when we look at each piece of coverage that's achieved, print or digital, it's then, for me, how clients reuse that. They reuse it through their content, through their marketing, through their websites, through their email signature, to make sure each piece has as many legs as it possibly can. And making sure that they're showcasing those successes. So it has changed it a lot. Influencers is a whole other sphere.
Yeah.
I call it the wonderful world of bloggers and influencers, because most people don't enjoy working with them on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, we do as an agency. But the power that they have, but what they expect, is also very interesting.
So on that note, like, for example, does any brand, like, for example, because I've keep hearing that there has to be a story, right, for PR, right? You just can't say, okay, you hire an agency and you say, okay, can you do PR for me? So is there, how big is the need for a story, or can you create a story can PR create a story out of everything? Is that miracle possible?
I'd like to think most PR professionals can. However, I call it fishing.
Yeah, okay.
And I must say, use the term on a daily basis. We go fishing for our clients, but we have to have a hook. If we haven't got a hook, we're not going to catch any fish.
Right.
So that's where the newsworthy element comes. However, if you delve into a brand's history, where they established, when's their birthday, what's the milestones, try and bring it into numbers. Reached 100 employees, there's a newsworthy hook to something, even if there hasn't been news and updates within the company as brand and services and products and so forth. You do need to have a hook. The change towards paying for coverage and so forth, there is that shift in this region, unfortunately, commercialising the production. So you can get there with little tweaks and kind of, I don't want to say backhanders, but you know what I mean. So you can get there from that, but having a true PR story has got to have a strong hook.
So while you're creating PR stories, and I'm sure that there are lots of hits and misses along the way, right? So what has been your greatest challenge that you have while creating a story, and like this is something that you feel that this is something I'm going to tell my grandkid about, or if at all?
I would say it's the daily struggle
Okay.
of understanding that one story or that one press release isn't going to have the impact that you think it is all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
We have to use multiple elements. We have to use different PR tools. And getting people to understand that is quite hard because everybody thinks their story is the best story.
Yeah.
And unfortunately.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to do with timing. There's a lot to do with, we've mentioned the paid element to things sometimes.
Right.
So that conversation I have a lot, and it's a struggle because who doesn't think their business is the best? Same thing with mothers and children. Who doesn't believe their child
Yeah.
is the best? So I think certainly with small businesses, that is a struggle.
Yeah.
And if I can give you a struggle with the larger businesses, it's the disconnect between the marketing teams and the C-suite of expectations and the management of those expectations. The marketing teams that we work with tend to understand, but they've ultimately got to report back to people who see nothing but numbers.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're the kind of struggles at either ends of the scale, I guess.
Yeah. So just briefly coming back to this word you use in between, which is a large part of PR now, which is influencers, right? I would like to think of you from the client side because as a PR professional, I think you do go and talk about the benefits of this. How does like a CMO who's hearing into this podcast think of how do I, if I've never done a influencer program as part of my marketing mix or my PR mix kind of a thing, how should they go about starting off on their journey of looking for an influencer program?
Great question. For me, I think it's who the audience is.
Right.
So influencers, we've gone through different stages of them obviously coming to the forefront and being incredibly important, and they are in our kind of toolkit. But it's not just gifting them and expecting coverage. What we have to do now is be more clever with how we're using them. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. But what are we using them for this month? What objective are we trying to meet?
Right.
One of the things that brands think is, well, I'm just going to give them loads of free things. But what we do very carefully rather is look at how we can craft the right messages for that month and that particular activation.
Right.
Rather than thinking about it a blanket of the year, we're going to allocate 10 influencers per month. Okay, great. It's wonderful that you're going to do that. What are we giving them in return? But also, what are our expectations, or actually more importantly, what are our expectations of them? Now, we also do a lot of spoon feeding with key messages. If we want them to cover on our behalf, we want them to review a product, review a location, experience a workshop, we need to give them the key messages so that they're delivering to the brand with the right tone of voice, with the key words and within those key messages. Because I've seen a lot as influencers have come to the forefront where they have done a rubbish job, but they'll say, well, you only asked me to do 5 stories, I've done 5 stories. We're having to guide them a lot more. So the biggest thing I would say is look at what are they doing this month and what's this month's objective rather than a blanket approach, and tweak that. Maybe we want them to attend an event. Maybe we want them to experience the latest product in the range. Maybe we want them just to communicate something's happening. There's lots of different ways to use them, as I say, in the nicest possible way, but to get the objectives out there.
So a couple of interviews back, I had somebody who was working the corporate comms team, and the entire conversation about how bigger corporates are trying to create a corporate, especially in the B2B business, right? So for me, so there's B2C business, there's B2B business. Now, B2C business influencers are pretty much a lot of BTL, ATL kind of works. Does PR work differently in a B2C segment and a B2B segment, or is pretty much the same mix that you look at?
Did you say PR or influencers or both? Do you want me to-
The entire PR mix, I'm assuming that here that influence is a subset of the PR, this thing. So does the way you approach a B2C brand and the way you approach a B2B brand differ in PR?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Sorry for the clarification.
Yeah.
With B2C, we're certainly looking a lot more because we want to reach our end consumer, and we're usually selling services and products and so forth. So I would use influencers a lot more. The landscape actually for B2C, certainly in this region, tends to be smaller. If you think about the magazine shelves of years ago, we've been here a while now, there used to be a lot more magazines and opportunities from a B2C point of view. There's less now. We're more looking at a column within a magazine of a generic magazine rather than a fully fledged beauty magazine, as an example. So that landscape is slightly smaller, and influencers play a much bigger part in that, as do events, whether the event is for the influencers and media or for your customers. We're bringing together many more elements in B2C. With B2B, the biggest thing that we have to play with, because there's less hooks, there's less stories. B2B businesses tend to not change their product offering on a day-to-day basis. Right. It's more in quarters or yearly, or new product range will come once a year, once every 2 years. We play a lot more to the thought leaders. So the better way to sell to B2B is by the education and your expertise. That's where we will choose that business incorporation company rather than that one, based on expertise and the people within it. So we play to thought leaders a lot more within the B2B space.
Okay, now we have discussed the past, the present kind of a thing, but just a kind of a sense check on how the future looks like. Now with AI, how has it changed the way, or how do you foresee? I mean, it's all kind of speculative at this point of time, because everybody has their own points of view depending on where they are in their own AI journey. But what do you see is going to be the landscape going forward?
Crystal ball, I wish I had one.
Yeah.
I think the one thing for me certainly is I've seen a lot more terribly written press releases.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, you can know it's from ChatGPT.
Yeah,
right?
110%. I mean, I've even seen a press release with an emoji in it. I mean, we all know where that came from. Right. Anyone that's used it once knows that. So I definitely foresee that we're going to have to navigate and stay true to our profession. Obviously, as PR professionals, we're trained to write for the media. All of a sudden, people think they don't need us to. And unfortunately, they do. So I think that'll be very interesting to see how, and that navigates the SEO and the back end of things. With regards to influencers, I hope that brands, agencies will stick together on this one, so that our industry doesn't get overtaken by them. And I think we are already, to be honest. But I want us to be stronger in that, because otherwise, a lot of businesses can be taken advantage of by influencers. So I think that's something to watch. And certainly, the press release writing and actually what that is. People think, I don't need a copywriter anymore.
Oh no! Oh my God! I think you need them more. And this is something that I have conversations with. Like, they feel that the graphic designer is dead with Midjourney. No, you need to have the right inputs, garbage in, garbage out, because all of those is based on the kind of right input. And there's some horrible content that goes out there because very clearly the right input did not go.
Yeah, they put a sentence in and got out 3,000 words. It's worrying.
So also, like I know, like in social media, it's a big one. It's not earned, but it's your own media kind of a thing, right? Has PR moved on to that space where you feel that the brand tone of voice that has to have a PR person's point of view, even in their own media, or how does it overlapping? Because a lot of the social agencies or digital agencies may not have a PR, or vice versa, right? Do you find there has to be kind of a sync between PR and the brand tone of voice on social media? And how will a small brand, like who cannot afford a PR and this thing, get that PR thought process into executing the social media strategy?
Yeah, I think the tone of voice across a brand should always be consistent. And I think certainly with a small brand, it's how you can best use your tools to your advantage. So a small brand that has a PR agency, as an example, but maybe in-house manages their socials in-house. If I was sitting there with that particular client and they say, I'm going to do the socials, I'm going to say, right, okay, great. Look at the press release we write for you. Within that, you will find numerous social media captions that you can drive from. So that same tone of voice across all channels is so important. But equally, then it brings us into integrated comms. The more integrated we can be, the better. And that's another thing that I will always say. If I sit down with a prospective client or with a current client and they say, we've got an agency for digital. I'm like, great, I'd love to meet them. So coming into the collaboration, we need to be able to collaborate to be on the same wavelength. A lot of people will go in silos to what they're doing.
Right.
Well, the agencies don't need to meet, or the agencies are enemies. No, we all need to work together. And I always go on the thing that everyone has different expertise. No agency can be 100% good at everything. So we all have a specialty. So with that collaboration, but we've got to go in tandem, because social media alone is not going to get the results. PR alone is not going to get the results. Spending thousands on Google Ads is not going to get the results if the other elements aren't there to back it up, because we all know, you hear about, I talk about restaurants, like I've also had client meetings with them today, but you hear about a restaurant, you'll look at it on social media, can't find the telephone number too easily, then you end up on Google. And then there's it's all got to be in sync.
Yeah, great. So I think PR is a touch point, and I think one of the biggest challenges you will face is to give the attribution to PR, and I think that will, because it's so number driven, because that touch point a lot of times may or may not have a data associated with it. Do you struggle with that as an agency, or is it something that is something that most of the clients understand, that this is something that cannot be directly attributed to success, but over a period of time you get success?
No, it's still an education factor, but right. I smiled while you were asking me that, because I still get asked a lot, right. or I get told a lot, X agency has guaranteed this number of coverage. And I'm a girl true to my heart and to my profession. I say, well, no PR professional can guarantee anything. And this comes back into the approach that's been taken with it. But there are no guarantees. You need the hook. Right. You need the hook, and you need solid media relations. So I think ultimately it's very different from that point. And it is we're forever educating clients. It's rare we find a client that goes, I know exactly what you do, and I know your process, and I understand. We're quite results driven here, and it's like, I want results now. What can you guarantee? Yeah,
and that's the toughest part, because right now, since everything instantaneous, right? Even the delivery is within 10 minutes, right? So they want marketing results in 10 minutes. And I think, I'm hearing out the pain and feeling it myself. Thanks a lot, Rosa. It's been enlightening. And I'm sure it was more so for the audience that were hearing about it. How does somebody get in touch with you? Where are you available on with social handles? Is there a preferred way of communicating with you or reaching out to you in case somebody wants to start off on their PR journey?
Bless you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. Always LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I'm always on. I'm probably not as consistent as I should be, but it's about 3 times a week rather than twice a day and so forth. Also, personally, Instagram. Right. I'm on Insta, and they're my 2 favorite channels, I would say.
Yeah. Since you mentioned LinkedIn, a quick question, because I just kind of happened to just go through your LinkedIn just before coming, in case there's something that I missed out, since, even though I know for you sometime. Is this mentor something that you've started, and it seems to be pretty new as this thing. So I want to close off on that note. Since it's new, I'm sure there's a lot that you want to achieve through that. So what is it before we finally close?
Bless you. Thank you very much. Marketing Mentors is my latest baby, if you like.
Right.
With a good co-worker of mine, Mike Hoff. We both decided that there's a drastic need for people to be supported in their journey. So while Associate is going from strength to strength and we're getting bigger and bigger clients, my heart always sits with helping people.
Right.
So the mentorship approach is because I'm fully aware as well in this region, and Mike and I have had so many chats, that marketing managers sometimes don't have a wealth of experience.
Sure.
I've been in the region for 10 years. I've watched the year turn 10 times. Experience is key, and a lot of people will say, great, fresh grad, I'm going to put them in a marketing manager role. Well, they actually need mentoring. They need help in order to get there, because we can't all be perfect at everything.
Yeah.
So that's the approach that we're taking with it. So as soon as kind of Associate gets to that stage, I'm like, but I'm not helping people as much anymore. So that's where Marketing Mentors came from.
All the best for this activity, and we will have a conversation around that outside of this podcast. But thank you again, and all the best.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.